She laughed at his shoes on a Tuesday. Not quietly, not the polite, contained laugh of someone who finds something amusing and manages it appropriately. She laughed with the full, unguarded volume of a person who has decided that the situation is funny and that the person at the center of it doesn't matter enough to warrant consideration. She was in the lobby of Meridian Tower with 3 other people, 2 of them colleagues, 1 of them her assistant, and all 4 of them had the specific sealed quality of people moving through a space in a group and treating everything outside the group as scenery. The shoes were, objectively, not in good condition. The left one had a separation at the toe where the sole had started to come away from the upper, a split maybe 1.5 inches long that was visible when he walked and that he had been managing with a combination of shoe glue and deliberate gait modification for about 3 weeks. The right one had a scuff on the toe that had been there for months and that no amount of polish had fully addressed. They were black dress shoes that had started their lives as decent shoes and had lived a long, hard-working life since, the kind of shoes that communicated, clearly and honestly, that the person wearing them was someone for whom replacing shoes was not currently the priority. His name was Derek Lawson. He was 36 years old, a single father to 1 8-year-old son named Cooper, and he was standing in the lobby of Meridian Tower at 8:47 a.m. on a Tuesday morning because he had a job interview on the 23rd floor at 9 o'clock for a position as Senior Operations Analyst at Meridian Logistics, which was one of the most significant firms in its sector in Atlanta, and which was, if Derek got the job, going to change the arithmetic of his current life in ways that were not small. He had Cooper's school drop-off at 7:45. He had the interview at 9. The MARTA train from Cooper's school to Midtown had run 12 minutes late because of a signal issue, and Derek had arrived at Meridian Tower with 11 minutes to spare instead of 23, which was not ideal but was workable. And he was standing in the lobby getting his bearings and making sure his jacket was straight when the group of 4 came through the revolving door behind him. He did not immediately notice them. He was looking at the building directory. He heard the laugh before he understood what it was directed at. Then he heard the voice, a woman's voice, confident, not particularly lowered, saying, "Look at the state of those shoes. Who lets someone walk into this building like that?" He understood. He turned, not quickly, not with the reactive speed of someone who had been stung. He turned the way he turned most things, steadily, taking in the situation before deciding what to do with it. The woman who had said it was looking at him. She was tall, in the kind of suit that made her height more deliberate, with dark hair and the specific bearing of someone who occupied the upper floors of buildings like this one and moved through the lower floors as though they were passage rather than a destination. She was, he registered, not young, late 40s, maybe early 50s, and she had the face of someone whose authority had been established long enough that she stopped tracking the effect it had on people around her. Their eyes met. She did not look embarrassed. She did not look away. She had said a thing in the semi-public space of a lobby, and she did not appear to consider it a thing that required any reckoning on her part. She looked at him for exactly 1 second. Then she moved toward the elevator bank with her group, which closed around her like a formation, and they were gone. Derek stood in the lobby. He looked down at his shoes. He looked back up. He adjusted his jacket, straightened his shoulders, and walked to the reception desk to announce his 9 o'clock appointment. The interview was on the 23rd floor, in a conference room with a view of downtown Atlanta that was the kind of view that reminded you why buildings were built tall. Derek had the specific, practiced composure of someone who had been to enough interviews to have developed a methodology for them. He arrived early enough to have a moment. He reviewed his notes in the elevator. He walked in with the energy of someone who was prepared and believed it. The interview panel was 3 people. Their names were Carol Pittman, who was head of operations, James O'Coffer, who was the director of the analytics division, and a third person, a man named Terry, who handled HR, and who was there primarily to observe rather than to evaluate. Derek had been preparing for this interview for 2 weeks. The position was Senior Operations Analyst. It was the kind of role that required someone who could look at logistics systems the way a diagnostician looked at a patient, reading the data for what it actually said rather than what the surface suggested. It was, in every meaningful sense, the kind of work Derek had been doing for 8 years in smaller organizations, and doing well, and the preparation showed in how he answered the questions, not fluently in the rehearsed sense, but fluently in the actual sense, the sense of someone who understood the material deeply enough that the questions were just different angles of looking at things he'd already thought about. Carol Pittman was the primary evaluator. She was in her late 40s, precise, the kind of interviewer who asked follow-up questions that were more revealing than the original questions, who listened for the thinking underneath the answer rather than the answer itself. Carol asked Derek about a specific supply chain disruption scenario, and he walked through his reasoning in a way that made her write something on her notepad, which was the interviewer behavior he knew to read as substantive engagement. James O'Coffer asked about software platforms. Derek answered specifically, not generally, naming systems he'd worked in and what he'd found their limitations to be, which was a more useful answer than the kind that just listed credentials. The interview ran 47 minutes, which was longer than the scheduled 30. When it ended, Carol shook his hand with the specific grip of someone who had arrived at a position and was confirming it. "We have 2 other candidates," she said. "We'll be in touch by end of week." "Thank you for your time," Derek said. He took the elevator back down to the lobby. He walked through it without stopping. He didn't look at the floor. He picked Cooper up at 3:15 from Westwood Elementary, the same way he did every day in the 11-year-old Civic that had 130,000 miles on it and that Derek maintained with the obsessive attention of someone who could not afford for it to stop working. Cooper came through the school doors with his backpack and the expression that Derek had learned to read like a weather system, the cloud patterns that meant a hard day, the specific brightness that meant something had happened worth telling. Today was the brightness. "We did a thing in science," Cooper said in the car, before his seatbelt was fully clicked, "about bridges. We had to build a bridge out of popsicle sticks and spaghetti, and mine held 43 pennies before it broke." 43, Derek said. "What was the class record?" 31, Cooper said with the specific satisfaction of a child who has exceeded expectations by a margin that leaves no room for dispute. "Did you figure out why yours held more?" "The triangles," Cooper said. "I used triangles at the load points instead of rectangles. Triangles distribute the weight better because," he paused, searching for the word he'd acquired in class, "because of the geometry." "The geometry," Derek said. "Mrs. Patterson said I should think about engineering." Cooper said, "I told her you do something like engineering at work." "Operations analysis," Derek said. "It's related." "She said all the good jobs are related," Cooper said. Derek drove. He thought about the 23rd floor and the 47-minute interview and Carol's notepad. He thought about triangles at load points and the geometry of weight distribution. He thought about Cooper at 3:15. He thought about the lobby and the laugh and the shoes, which he had looked at again in the parking garage after the interview with the objective eye of someone trying to assess them honestly. They needed to be replaced. He had known this. The assessment was not new information. "Dad," Cooper said. "Yeah?" "Your shoes are different." Derek glanced at him in the rearview mirror. "What do you mean?" "The left one makes a different sound when you walk, like a small click. It started a few weeks ago." Derek thought about the 8-year-old who had noticed a barely perceptible change in his father's footwear. "I know," he said. "I need new ones." "Can we get them this weekend?" "Maybe," Derek said, which meant probably not this weekend, which Cooper understood because Cooper was 8 and had developed the specific, accurate instincts of a child who lived with one parent and a careful budget and who had learned to read maybe the way other children read weather. He did not push it. He went back to the bridge and the 43 pennies and the geometry of triangles. Derek drove home. The call came Thursday. Not Friday, Thursday, 2 days earlier than the end-of-week time frame Carol had given, which Derek allowed himself to read as a positive signal before he answered, because the reading of signals was part of how you navigated uncertainty, and there was no reason not to use available information. "Mr. Lawson," Carol Pittman said, "I want to let you know that the interview panel met this morning and we've reached a decision." Derek was standing in the kitchen of his apartment. Cooper was at school. He had a notebook open because he had learned to take notes when professional calls happened, because the adrenaline of the moment sometimes made details slippery. "We're looking to offer you the position," Carol said. "Senior Operations Analyst. The offer package is going to your email now." Derek wrote it down. He looked at what he'd written. He wrote it again next to the first, because sometimes writing a thing twice made it real in a way that once didn't. "I'd like to review the offer and respond by end of day tomorrow," he said. "Of course," Carol said. "There is one thing I want to mention before you do." "Okay," he said. "The panel was unanimous," she said, "which doesn't always happen. James O'Coffer specifically noted the way you discussed the platform limitations. He said it was the most practically grounded answer to that question he'd heard in 3 months of interviewing candidates." Derek held the phone. "Thank you," he said. "I'll review it tonight." He hung up. He stood in the kitchen for a moment. He thought about the 23rd floor and the 47-minute interview and Carol's notepad. He thought about triangles at load points and the geometry of weight distribution. He thought about Cooper at 3:15. He opened the offer email. He read it twice. He sat down. What happened the following morning, the Wednesday morning referenced in the title of this story, the morning that was the other half of the Tuesday that had started it, began with a staff email at Meridian Logistics at 7:15 a.m. The email was from the CEO of Meridian Logistics. Her name was Katherine Bryce. Katherine Bryce had been CEO of Meridian Logistics for 6 years, having moved up from COO through a trajectory that was widely acknowledged as both earned and swift. She was 51 years old, ran the company with a combination of strategic precision and operational depth that had taken the firm from regional to national in 4 years, and was, in the assessment of most people who worked with her or for her, an extremely effective executive who had let certain habits calcify in ways that had gone unexamined because effectiveness tends to insulate people from the feedback that would address the calcification. The habit in question was a specific, unexamined comfort with casual cruelty in public spaces that she did not register as cruelty, that she registered as observation or humor, and that her team had learned over years of proximity not to comment on. The Tuesday morning laugh in the lobby was not the first time. It was not the 10th time. It was the time that intersected with the specific constellation of subsequent events that made Tuesday significant. What Katherine Bryce did not know on Tuesday morning when she laughed at the shoes in the lobby and got on the elevator with her group was the following. The man with the torn shoes was Derek Lawson, whose interview she had personally approved adding to the candidate slate after reviewing his resume, which had come through a recruiter she trusted. She had not seen a photograph. She had seen a resume that her head of operations and her analytics director had flagged as among the strongest they'd reviewed for the position. She also did not know, because the shoe interaction had lasted approximately 4 seconds and she had not given it any thought after, that 3 of the lobby's regular security personnel had been within earshot of the interaction, including the head of building security, a man named Walter Sims, who had worked the lobby of Meridian Tower for 11 years and who had a specific, long-developed sensitivity to exactly this kind of thing because he had experienced its receiving end enough times to know what it cost. Walter Sims did not take action immediately. He was not an impulsive man. He thought about what he'd seen for the rest of Tuesday, and then he thought about it on Tuesday evening, and on Wednesday morning he made a phone call to his counterpart in building management about a security protocol update for executive access, which he had been meaning to make for unrelated reasons, and while he was on the phone they discussed several items, and one of the items they discussed was credential confirmation for building access. The protocol that resulted from that discussion was standard and existing policy, one that had not been strictly enforced at the executive level, because executives generally moved through lobbies with the ease of people who had been moving through lobbies without interruption for long enough that interruption seemed both unlikely and unnecessary. The following morning, at 8:52 a.m., Katherine Bryce came through the revolving door of Meridian Tower and walked toward the elevator bank. Walter Sims stepped into her path. He was polite. He was professional. He was, if anything, more formally courteous than he needed to be, which was its own kind of precision. "Miss Bryce, good morning. We're doing credential confirmations this morning as part of the updated access protocol. Could I see your building ID?" Katherine Bryce looked at him. She looked at him with the expression of someone who had not been asked for their building ID in 6 years, and who was doing the rapid social calculation of a person surprised by an obstacle they didn't expect. "Walter," she said, "you know who I am." "Yes, ma'am," Walter said. "The protocol applies to all building access, including executive level. I apologize for the inconvenience." She looked around the lobby. 2 of her colleagues who had arrived with her were watching with the careful blankness of people who have learned not to express opinions in situations involving their boss and a public inconvenience. Her assistant was behind her, and her assistant, a young woman named Grace who had been with Katherine for 2 years and who had been one of the 4 people present in the lobby the previous morning, had the expression of someone who was looking very carefully at a spot on the floor that was not particularly interesting. Katherine opened her bag. She found her building ID. She presented it. Walter examined it with the thoroughness of someone who was doing a thing correctly. "Thank you, Miss Bryce. Have a good morning." She walked to the elevator. She did not look at Walter as she passed. She pressed the button for the 41st floor, which was where her office was. In the lobby, Walter Sims returned to his station. He didn't say anything to anyone about what had happened. He didn't need to. She opened his file, which was in the candidate management system and which she had access to. She read his resume, which she had seen before, the one that had produced the specific assessment of strong candidate that had put him on the interview slate. She looked at his work history, which was 8 years of increasingly responsible operations analysis roles at 3 different logistics firms, all of them smaller than Meridian, all of them with performance reviews that Carol had attached as part of the due diligence. She looked at the photograph that was part of the file. She sat very still for a moment. She looked at the photograph with the specific, uncomfortable recognition of someone who has just connected 2 things that were separate in their mind and that are now, irreversibly, one thing. The man in the lobby, the shoes, the laugh, the accepted candidate sitting in the candidate management system who James Okafor had just said was going to be exceptional. Katherine Bryce sat in her office on the 41st floor of Meridian Tower for a long time. She thought about what she had done. She thought about it not from the angle of what it might mean professionally if it came to light. She was self-aware enough, in this moment, to understand that the professional angle was not the right angle, and reaching for it first would be a specific kind of cowardice. She thought about it from the angle of what it actually was, which was that she had laughed at a man in a lobby for the condition of his shoes, and the man she had laughed at was someone who by every available measure deserved to be walking through that lobby as much as she did, and who was going to walk through it every day for the foreseeable future, and who might or might not ever know that the woman who had laughed at him was the same woman who signed the offer letter he had accepted. She thought about a lot of things. She thought about what her daughter would say if she'd seen it. Her daughter was 23 and had, as daughters sometimes did at 23, developed a capacity for looking at her mother with an honest eye that Katherine had not always found comfortable, and that she had, in her better moments, recognized as one of the most valuable things in her life. She thought about Walter Sims in the lobby that morning, the credential confirmation, the protocol that had not been strictly enforced at the executive level in years. She thought about the difference between effective and good, which was a distinction she had spent 6 years not examining, because effectiveness was the metric she'd organized her professional life around, and the distinction had felt, when it surfaced, like a distraction from what she was trying to accomplish. She picked up her phone. She called Carol. "The Lawson hire. When he starts, I'd like to be in the onboarding meeting." Carol was quiet for a moment. CEOs did not typically attend onboarding meetings for analyst hires. "Of course," Carol said carefully. "Is there something specific you'd like to address?" "I'd like to welcome him properly," Katherine said. "I reviewed his file today. He should have been on my radar earlier." She paused. "Make sure the meeting room is booked for a full hour. I want to hear his perspective on the analytics division before he's been shaped by our existing assumptions." "I'll arrange it," Carol said. Katherine hung up. She sat for another moment. Then she did the other thing she'd decided to do, which was harder than the phone call. She opened her calendar. She blocked 45 minutes on Thursday morning, the morning before Derek Lawson's start date, and she put in the block a note that said, "Lobby, speak to Derek Lawson. No audience." She was not going to tell him she'd seen him. She was not going to confess. That would make the conversation about her discomfort rather than about him, and he had not done anything that required absorbing someone else's discomfort. She was going to introduce herself. She was going to tell him that she had reviewed his file, and that she was glad he had accepted the offer, and that she looked forward to the onboarding conversation. She was going to do it in the lobby because the lobby was the place, and because she had learned over 26 years in business that the right way to address something you'd gotten wrong was to address it in the place you'd gotten it wrong, even if the addressing was indirect, even if you were the only person who knew exactly what the addressing was for. That was the decision. She made it. Derek Lawson arrived at Meridian Tower on a Monday morning 2 weeks later. He had new shoes. Not expensive shoes. He had not been paid yet, and the first paycheck was still 2 weeks out. But he had gone to the outlet store on Saturday with Cooper and found a pair that were solid, well-made, genuinely black dress shoes that were going to last, and he had paid for them with the specific discipline of someone who was making a considered investment rather than an indulgence. Cooper had assessed them in the store with the focused attention he brought to all load-bearing evaluations. "These ones," Cooper had said, picking the pair Derek had already been leaning towards. "The construction looks right. See how the sole is attached here? That's a proper welt. It'll hold." "You looked up how shoe construction works?" Derek said. "After you said you needed new ones," Cooper had said with the matter-of-fact quality that was simply how Cooper operated. "I wanted to know what made a good one." Derek had bought the shoes with the welt. He wore them on his first day at Meridian Logistics. He came through the revolving door of Meridian Tower at 8:41 a.m., 19 minutes before his scheduled arrival, which was his preference, and crossed the lobby to the reception desk. He was halfway across the lobby when a woman fell into step beside him. He registered the step before he registered the person, because his attention was on the reception desk and the sign-in process, and the beginning of a new chapter that he had been working towards for a long time. He looked to his left. He did not recognize her. He had no reason to. He had seen her for 1 second 3 weeks ago in a crowded lobby on a morning when he had more important things to attend to, and he had not held on to the image that she had held on to his shoes. She extended her hand. "Katherine Bryce," she said. "I'm the CEO. I wanted to introduce myself before you got to orientation." He shook her hand. "Derek Lawson, nice to meet you." She said, "I reviewed your file last week. Carol and James have been talking about you since Thursday. I wanted to hear your perspective on the analytics framework we're running before orientation shapes it." She looked at him directly. "Would you be willing to have a conversation before the formal onboarding? My office, 20 minutes?" He looked at her. She was, he thought, very direct. More direct than CEOs often were in first interactions, which tended towards the ceremonial rather than the substantive. He had no context for it. "Of course," he said. They walked to the elevator together. In the elevator, she asked him about the last logistics platform he'd worked in and what he'd found its reporting limitations to be, and he answered specifically, the same way he'd answered James Okafor in the interview, and she listened with the focused concentration that he would come to recognize over the coming months to be her primary professional mode when she was actually interested in what she was hearing. The elevator opened on 41. She held the door. "Mr. Lawson," she said. He stepped out. He turned. She was still holding the door, looking at him with the expression that he could not name yet because he didn't have enough context, that would take months to understand, that was the expression of a person who was doing a small, specific thing that they needed to do for reasons they were not going to explain. "I'm glad you're here," she said. Not CEO to new employee, something more specific, something with more weight in it than the occasion required. "Thank you. I'm glad to be here," he said. She stepped out. The elevator doors closed. He followed her down the corridor towards the office that was as far from the lobby as you could get in the building. The corner office, the floor-to-ceiling glass, the view that was everything the 23rd floor view had been and then more. He walked through it looking at the city. He did not look at his shoes. 6 months later, the quarterly analytics report that Derek's team produced was the basis for a restructuring of Meridian's distribution network in the Southeast Corridor that Carol Pittman described in the leadership meeting as the most operationally significant internal analysis the company had produced in 3 years. Katherine Bryce sat at the head of the conference room table and listened to Derek present the findings with the same focused attention she'd brought to every conversation she'd had with him since the lobby, which was a significant number of conversations, because Derek Lawson had turned out to be, as James Okafor had predicted, exceptional.
and exceptional people had a way of ending up in rooms where the most important conversations happened. He presented the way he interviewed, clearly, specifically, without the hedging that the uncertainty of a new environment sometimes produced in people who had something real to say. He answered questions the same way. When Katherine asked the hardest question, a question about a particular assumption in the distribution model that she had identified as potentially under-defended, he sat with it for a moment, acknowledged that she was right, and then said what the additional data would need to look like to strengthen it. Not defensive, not deflective, just honest. After the meeting, as the room cleared, Katherine was at the window. The kind of standing at windows that happened when a person was where they were supposed to be and had a moment to simply be in it. Derek was collecting his materials at the table. "Mr. Lawson," Katherine said. "Derek," he said. "Derek," she said. "The question I asked you about the distribution assumption, you acknowledged it without defensiveness. It was a fair question," he said. "The model had a gap there. Most people defend the gap, or they minimize it." He looked at her. "Defending a gap doesn't close it. Acknowledging it is how you get to what closes it." She nodded. "I want to tell you something. And I want to say it directly, because I believe direct is how things should be said when they matter." He waited. "The first day you came to this building, not your start date, your interview day, I saw you in the lobby." She held his gaze. "I said something I'm not proud of, about your shoes." She paused. "You didn't hear me say it, or if you did, you've given no indication. But I said it, and I know I said it, and it has mattered to me in a way that I think was useful, in terms of what I learned from the mattering." Derek was still. "You don't owe me anything for that," she said. "I'm not telling you so you'll absolve me. I'm telling you because I believe in direct, and I believe in owning things, and I believe that you, specifically, deserve to know that the version of this company you walked into, and the version you're working in now, includes someone at the top who is paying attention to the difference between effective and good, and is trying to close the gap." She looked at the window. "You helped me see the gap, without knowing you did." Derek was still. "You don't have to apologize," he said. "I'm not apologizing," she said. "I'm acknowledging something." He thought about the Tuesday morning, about the laugh he'd heard
From 6 feet away in the lobby, about looking down at his shoes and then looking up and adjusting his jacket and walking to the reception desk, about Cooper that afternoon and the bridge and the 43 pennies and the geometry of triangles, about the shoes with the welt that Cooper had researched. "Miss Bryce?" he said. She looked at him. "I heard it," he said, simply, without performance. She held very still. "I heard it," he said, again, "and then I went to my interview." He looked at his materials on the table. "I've been on the receiving end of things like that often enough to know that the choice is whether you let it change your posture or not. I chose not to." He looked back at her. "I didn't carry it in here with me. I left it in the lobby." She looked at him for a long time. "That's a specific kind of discipline," she said. "It's the kind that matters," he said. "The other kind, the one where you carry it, only costs the person who carries it." She was quiet. "The shoes I was wearing that day," he said, "were doing their best, same as I was." She looked at the window. "And now?" "Now I have better ones," he said. "My son picked them out. He researched shoe construction to find the right welt." He almost smiled. "He's 8. "He sounds like someone who's going to be exceptional," she said. "He already is," Derek said. "I'm just trying to keep up." She nodded. Outside, Atlanta was doing what Atlanta did in November, queer and specific, the light at the angle that was its own kind of beautiful when you stopped long enough to look at it. The distribution model, the gap in the southeast corridor assumption, what data would you need to close it? "I've been thinking about that. I have a proposal. Can I have 30 minutes on your calendar next week?" "Send it to Grace," she said. "I'll make it happen." "Thank you." He collected his materials. He walked toward the conference room door. "Derek," she said. He turned. "The 43 pennies," she said. He looked at her. "You mentioned your son built a bridge in science class," she said. "You told me that story in the onboarding meeting. 43 pennies. He used triangles at the load points," Derek said. "The geometry." "The distribution model," she said. "You've been doing the same thing. Load-bearing assumptions at the right points. It's the same geometry." He thought about that. "It is," he said. He figured it out at 8. Geometry doesn't change scale. Load-bearing is load-bearing, whether it's popsicle sticks or logistics networks. That's what I told him, Derek said. Tell him he's right, she said, about more than the bridge. He left. She stood at the window for a while after he was gone. 41 floors below, the lobby of Meridian Tower was doing what lobbies did. People coming and going, the revolving door turning, the morning moving through in its usual way, indifferent to the specific and significant things that happened inside it. She thought about Tuesday mornings and lobbies and what a person communicated when they didn't think anyone who mattered was watching. She thought about Walter Sims and the credential confirmation that she had not thought about since, and that she understood now, with the benefit of 6 months of paying a different kind of attention, had been exactly what it appeared to be. She thought about discipline, about the kind that mattered, about the kind where you left the thing that cost you in the lobby rather than carrying it into the room where you had work to do. She thought about new shoes with the right welt, and an 8-year-old who researched shoe construction on a Tuesday night because his father had said he needed better ones, and that was enough reason. She turned from the window. She had a company to run. She had a gap to close. She went back to her desk. If you've ever walked into a room that tried to diminish you before you got through the door, and walked through it anyway, and did the work anyway, and left the thing in the lobby where it belonged, this story is for you. The discipline that matters is the kind that doesn't carry the cost. The geometry doesn't change scale. Load-bearing is load-bearing. And sometimes the person who laughed at your shoes is the same person who 6 months later is asking you for 30 minutes on their calendar about the gap you helped them see. Drop a comment and tell us about something you refuse to carry. We read every single one. Subscribe for more stories like this every week. We'll see you next time.